There's one thing I've never really understood about the NFL draft. This is not football. Like, yes, it's football adjacent, but in practice, I would just look at this thing. Definitely not football. It's a bunch of guys in suits waiting to hear their name get read off a piece of paper by a much older guy in a suit. It's not even the combine, where at least there's guys running around and throwing and lifting weights and stuff. Functionally, the draft has more in common with the trip to the DMV than it does an NFL game, and yet, it's become one of the most popular nights of television for the entire year. Last year alone, the draft pulled in almost 13 million viewers across the 3 different networks that it was broadcast on. That's more people watching than all but one of the NBA Finals games, or even an episode of NCIS, which is no joke. NCIS is a television juggernaut. Like, do you realize that they're on their 19th season right now? And they're still one of the most popular shows on TV. For the life of me, I can't figure out how, but they're still going strong. How many naval crimes could there possibly be for these guys to solve? What was I talking about again? Right, yeah, that. The most amazing thing to me in looking at those numbers was that in a lot of cases, the draft pulls in a larger audience than actual NFL primetime games. Like, move over Monday Night Football, and Thursday Night Football, and the World Series, and the Olympics, and basically everything else. We've got some names for Roger Goodell to read. Draft analysis has even spawned a kind of cottage industry where people have built their entire careers on being able to prognosticate what's going to happen. There are podcasts, blogs, YouTube channels, and pretty much whatever else kind of media you can think of devoted specifically to breaking down the minutiae of every part of the draft process. All for something that, again, is not football. Football, not football. Football, not football. You get it. Just think about that for a second. If you're a draft analyst, or even better, a person who listens to their podcast, you're like 3 or 4 levels deep on this weird flowchart. A surprising amount of degrees removed from people actually lining up and playing the sport. And yet, we lap it up. Those people get views and listens and tons of engagement because we are so obsessed with this thing. And believe me, I'm no different. I don't even really have an NFL team, but the draft is still appointment television at our house. There are a lot of practical reasons why someone would want to tune in. You want to see who your favorite team picks, you want to see if there are any players from your college team that get chosen, or you just like watching Mel Kiper's hair. I wouldn't blame you for that last one. I don't think it's moved in like 30 years. The draft also represents hope to the teams and fans that don't usually have any. But 12.6 million people is like a lot. On a Thursday, no less. And that's not even including all the people that watched or followed along on all the NFL social media channels, which was quite a few of them. The demand for this event is genuinely unbelievable, to the point that it defies the reasons that people watch it that make sense. Trying to unpack the psychology behind the rabid enthusiasm for the draft is not easy, but I think I have a theory. The reason I think we're all so hooked on the NFL draft is related to a hypothesis called the pleasure paradox, which is not nearly as titillating as it sounds. This theory revolves around the idea that when it comes to experiencing really positive feelings, certainty is kind of the enemy. When we do know what's going to happen, our brains can still enjoy things, like what that cup of coffee in the morning tastes like, or the feeling that we get watching our favorite movie for the 50th time. But while we do appreciate the control that those things offer us, the irony of that is that to get to the real good stuff, like just a whole bunch of dopamine, something unexpected needs to happen. This is because we're more likely to experience feelings of excitement and anticipation when we don't know what's going to happen, even if it might end up being bad. So if you rewind the clock to a year ago, and you're a Jacksonville Jaguars fan, well, first of all, let me just tell you, you're about to have such an interesting season. But going into the 2021 draft, basically the whole world knew that they were going to take Trevor Lawrence. He'd been the presumptive number 1 pick since that national title game where he and Justin Ross took apart Alabama, and the Jaguars had a significant need at that position. It was basically a foregone conclusion that he was going to end the night with the Jaguars jersey on. So even if their fans were happy with that result, which there wasn't really any reason for them not to be, they weren't as euphoric as they could have been. Contrast that with a team like the New England Patriots, who also needed a quarterback, but were too low down the draft board to get any of the guys at the top, or so they thought. When Mac Jones slid all the way down to the Patriots at 15, their fans got to enjoy that even more because they didn't anticipate that even being possible. There was talk that the Niners were going to take him at 3, or the Falcons at 4, or even the Panthers at 8, but none of that ended up happening. Something similar happened with the Bears and Justin Fields. They were all the way down at 20, but a trade with the Giants put them in a position to take Fields at 11 when he slid down the board. Coming into the night, Either one of those players winding up where they did would have seemed exceedingly unlikely, but through a series of unforeseen circumstances, that's exactly what happened, and their fans enjoyed it that much more because of it. Even the possibility of something like that is one of the reasons why I think the draft is so appealing, and ESPN is keenly aware of that uncertainty element. That's why you see them throwing out mock drafts in, August. They know that the drama of trades and figuring out who's going to go where is a big reason why people watch, and they're going to play it up in their marketing as much as possible. And there's going to be quite a lot of that marketing too, because aside from Monday Night Football, the draft is one of the few NFL properties that ESPN actually has the rights to. CBS and Fox and NBC get to take the NFL to the bank from Thursday to Sunday, but the draft, that's all ESPN, and they're going to make sure you're aware. They're hoping that all that discussion of the draft before it actually happens will help create and amplify the storylines going into it. And most of the time, they're right. This might be because of a psychological phenomenon known as the mere exposure effect, where we think more positively about something the more we get exposed to it. If you spend the 6 months before the draft hearing about how interesting it's going to be, you're going to be more likely to internalize that message and tune in on the night to see what happens. So we know that the draft can be very exciting because it's unpredictable, and that the network putting it on wants as many people as possible to know about it. But why is that so effective? Uncertainty can make things more fun, but it's not exactly a groundbreaking take for me to say that uncertainty is not always a good thing. In our own lives, most of us would probably prefer less risk if it meant that we knew we were going to get something good out of it. The Trevor Lawrence effect. But the final thing to me that makes the draft so appealing is that it maintains the appearance of risk and uncertainty without any of the consequences that usually come along with those things. There are people's livelihoods and careers and reputations and stuff at stake with every one of those picks, but we get to enjoy all the intrigue without any of the stakes that go underneath it. This supports an idea known as the uncertainty intensification hypothesis, where the presence or even the suggestion of uncertainty can actually alter our interpretation of events. To study this, researchers ran 4 different trials where they had subjects watch the same negative and positive film clips and then recorded their reactions. One group was instructed to say phrases that connoted certainty, like, "I know what's going to happen." The other group was told to do the opposite and say things like, "I don't know what's going to happen." And based on what we said earlier, you can probably see where I'm going with this. The group that said phrases connoting uncertainty felt stronger emotions related to the same clips, which supports the idea that creating an environment of uncertainty and intrigue can actually prime someone to experience their own emotions differently. On draft night, the inherent unpredictability that comes along with the event, as well as the frequent exposure and emotional priming that comes from its marketing, all combine to create one of the most entertaining nights of television of the entire year. To me, the NFL Draft works its audience in a very similar way to a show like Survivor, where we get to experience all the gameplay and intrigue in real time without having to go through any of the actual human emotion that would come with being in the room, or on the island in this case. The competition element of it is accessible and familiar, but there are no personal stakes involved for the viewer. We're not the ones making the calls or organizing the blindsides, nor are we trying to keep our jobs or win $1 million. For us, the draft is a kind of strategy-based game show that our favorite team is a contestant on, a highly complicated game of risk that we get to take part in without actually having to make the decisions. And when you think about it like that, it's no wonder so many people watch it, because all at once, it's a beautifully simple human psychological experiment, as well as an incredibly entertaining piece of television. For a lot of people, reasons for watching the draft are much simpler than what I just described. They may be a long-suffering Jets fan, for instance, hoping that this year will finally be the year that a player can come along to end their misery. Incidentally, I wish I had better news for you guys, but it's probably not going to happen. But for the draft to have the wide-ranging and enduring appeal that it's gained over the years, something else has to be going on below the surface. I'm not certain exactly what that might be, but then again, that's kind of the point. When it comes to the NFL draft, nothing is certain, and that's why so many people watch, or read, or listen, basically any time during the calendar year. NFL fans are as rabid as they come, and all they can really do this time of year is hope that the football gods will rule in their favor. But in the event that that does happen, it'll be on that one night in April, and we'll all be in front of our TVs enjoying every minute of it. Greetings to all my fellow students out there who love the NFL and love its draft. You are all such a blessing to me, and I'm so glad to be able to have a space where I can nerd out with you like this. If you have a second, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video, or even subscribe to the channel to get more content like this. I try to put out a video every week or so, give or take a couple of days. But if you've got an NFL team, let me know who you think they'll pick, or even who you want them to pick, because that's half the fun of this whole thing. It's how Todd McShay still has a job. You may be right, you may be hilariously wrong, but in any case, we'll all enjoy the draft together. Until next time, I'm Will. Happy draft day.